Okay, I'm back. Now that I've finished COD World War II, I really want to finish this novel at least. I don't know if I want to do the further stories. But here we go. Well, this is Chapter 3. John Ferrier talks with the Prophet. 3 weeks had passed since Jefferson Hope and his comrades had departed from Salt Lake City. John Ferrier's heart was sore within him when he thought of the young man's return, and of the impending loss of his adopted child. Yet her bright and happy face reconciled him to the arrangement more than any argument could have done. He had always determined, deep down in his resolute heart, that nothing would ever induce him to allow his daughter to wed a Mormon. Such a marriage he regarded as no marriage at all, but as a shame and a disgrace. Whatever he might think of the Mormon doctrines, upon that one point he was inflexible. He had to seal his mouth on the subject, however, for to express an unorthodox opinion was a dangerous matter in those days in the land of the saints. Yes, a dangerous matter. So dangerous that even the most saintly dared only whisper their religious opinions with bated breath, lest something which fell from their lips might be misconstrued, and bring down a swift retribution upon them. The victims of persecution had now turned persecutors on their own account, and persecutors of the most terrible description. Not the Inquisition of Seville, nor the German Weimgarret, nor the secret societies of Italy, were ever able to put a more formidable machinery in motion than that which cast a cloud over the state of Utah. Its invisibility, and the mystery which was attached to it, made this organization doubly terrible. It appeared to be omniscient and omnipotent, and yet was neither seen nor heard. The man who held out against the church vanished away, and none knew whether he had gone or what had befallen him. His wife and children awaited him at home, but no father ever returned to tell them how he fared at the hands of his secret judges. A rash word or a hasty act was followed by annihilation, and yet none knew what the nature might be of this terrible power which was suspended over them. No wonder that men went about in fear and trembling, and that even in the heart of the wilderness they dared not whisper the doubts which oppressed them. At first this vague and terrible power was exercised only upon the recalcitrants, who, having embraced the Mormon faith, wished afterwards to pervert or to abandon it. Soon, however, it took a wider range. The supply of adult women was running short, and polygamy without a female population, on which to draw, was a barren doctrine indeed. Strange rumors began to be bandied about, rumors of murdered immigrants and rifled camps, in regions where Indians had never been seen. Fresh women appeared in the harems of the elders, women who pined and wept, and bore upon their faces the traces of an unextinguishable horror. Belated wanderers upon the mountains spoke of gangs of armed men, masked, stealthy, and noiseless, who flitted by them in the darkness. These tales and rumors took substance and shape, and were corroborated and re-corroborated, until they resolved themselves into a definite name. To this day, in the lonely ranches of the West, the name of the Denit Band, or the Avenging Angels, is a sinister and ill-omened one. Fuller knowledge of the organization which produced such terrible results served to increase rather than to lessen the horror which it inspired in the minds of men. None knew who belonged to this ruthless society. The names of the participators in the deeds of blood and violence done under the name of a religion were kept profoundly secret. The very friend to whom you communicate your misgivings as to the Prophet and his permission might be one of those who would come forth at night with fire and sword to exact the terrible reparation. Hence every man feared his neighbor, and none spoke of the things which were nearest to his heart. One fine morning John Ferrier was about to set out to his wheat fields, when he heard the click of the latch, and looking through the window saw a stout, sandy-haired, middle-aged man coming up the pathway. His heart leapt to his mouth, for this was none other than the great Brigham Young himself. Full of trepidation, for he knew that such a visit boded him little good, John Ferrier ran to the door to greet the Mormon chief. The latter, however, received the salutations coldly, and followed them with stern face into the sitting room. "Brother Ferrier," he said, taking a seat and eyeing the farmer keenly from under his light-colored eyelashes, "the true believers have been good friends to you. We picked you up when you were starving in the desert. We shared our food with you, led you safe to the chosen valley, gave you a goodly share of land, and allowed you to wax rich under our protection. Is this not so?" It is so, answered John Ferrier. In return for all this we asked but one condition. That was, that you should embrace the true faith, and conform in every way to its usages. This you promised to do, and this, if common report says truly, you have neglected. And how have I neglected it? Asked Ferrier, throwing out his hands in expostulation. Have I not given to the common fund? Have I not attended at the temple? Have I not— Where are your wives? Asked Young, looking round him. Call them in, that I may greet them. It is true that I have not married, Ferrier answered, but women were few, and there were many who had better claims than I. I was not a lonely man. I had my daughter to attend to my wants. It is of that daughter that I would speak to you, said the leader of the Mormons. She has grown to be the flower of Utah, and has found favor in the eyes of many who are high in the land. John Ferrier groaned internally. There are stories of her which I would fain disbelieve, stories that she is sealed to some Gentile. This must be the gossip of idle tongues. What is the 13th rule in the code of the sainted Joseph Smith? Let every maiden of the true faith marry one of the elect, for if she wed a Gentile she commits a grievous sin. This being so, it is impossible that you, who profess to the Holy Creed, should suffer your daughter to violate it. John Ferrier made no answer, but he played nervously with his riding crop. Upon this one point your whole faith shall be tested. So has been decided in the sacred council of 4. The girl is young, and we would not have her wed gray hairs. Neither would we deprive her of all choice. We elders have many heifers, but our children must be provided. Stangerson has a son, and Drebber has a son, and either of them would gladly welcome your daughter to their house. Let her choose between them. They are young and rich, and of the true faith. What say you to that? Ferrier remained silent for some little time with his brow knitted. You will give us some time, he said at last. My daughter is very young. She is scarce of an age to marry. She shall have a month to choose, said Young, rising from his seat. At the end of that time she shall give her answer. He was passing through the door when he turned, with flushed face and flashing eyes. It were better for you, John Ferrier, he thundered, that you and she were now lying blanched skeletons upon the Sierra Blanco, than you should put your weak wills against the order of the Holy 4. With a threatening gesture of his hand, he turned from the door, and Ferrier heard his heavy steps crunching along the shingly path. He was still sitting with his elbow upon his knees, considering how he should broach the matter to his daughter, when a soft hand was laid upon his, and looking up, he saw her standing beside him. One glance at her pale, frightened face showed him that she had heard what had passed. I could not help it, she said, in answer to his look. His voice rang through the house. Oh, father, father, what shall we do? Don't scare yourself, he answered, drawing her to him, passing his broad, rough hand caressingly over her chestnut hair. We'll fix it up somehow or another. You don't find your fancy kinda lessening for this chap, do you? A sob and a squeeze of his hand was her only answer. No, of course not. I shouldn't care to hear you say you did. He's a likely lad, and he's a Christian, which is more than these folks here, in spite of their praying and preaching. There's a party starting for Nevada tomorrow, and I'll manage to send him a message letting him know the hole we're in. If I know anything of that young man, he'll be back here with a speed that would whip electro-telegraphs. Lucy laughed through her tears at her father's description. When he comes, he will advise us for the best. But it is for you that I am frightened, dear. One hears such dreadful stories about those who oppose the prophet. Something terrible always happens to them. But we haven't opposed him yet, her father answered. It will be time to look out for squalls when we do. We have a clear month before us. At the end of that, I guess we had best shin out of Utah. Leave Utah? That's about the size of it. But the farm. We will raise as much as we can in money, and let the rest go. To tell the truth, Lucy, it isn't the first time I had thought of doing it. I don't care about knuckling under to any man, as these folks do to their darn prophet. I'm a free-born American, and it's all new to me. Guess I'm too old to learn. If he comes browsing about this farm, he might chance to run up against a charge of buckshot traveling in the opposite direction. But they won't let us leave, his daughter objected. Wait till Jefferson comes, and we'll soon manage that. In the meantime, don't you fret yourself, my dearie, and don't get your eyes swelled up, else he'll be walking into me when he sees you. There's nothing to be afeared about, and there's no danger at all. John Ferrier uttered these consoling remarks in a very confident tone, but she could not help observing that he paid unusual care to the fastening of the doors that night, and that he carefully cleaned and loaded the rusty old shotgun which hung upon the wall of his bedroom. Okay, so we have some very unflattering things said about the Mormons, especially Brigham Young himself comes in to threaten one of our protagonists, right? Who's Brigham Young is still a very he's a saint of theirs, right? Let me see. Google this. He's one of the early leaders. He's the second president of the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints. Okay, so he founded Salt Lake City also. He served as governor of the Utah Territory. So for him to be written into a book as the villain is very... I can totally see how it would be very offensive to people of that religion. We elders have many Hafers. What's the postmark? Herbert C. Kemble, in one of his sermons, alluded to his 100 wives under this endearing epithet. Hafers is a young cow. So it's another insult or joke, I suppose. Yes, a young cow before she has had her first calf. Yeah, it's another insult basically to the religion. This is a very short chapter. It's only 4 pages long. All right, let's go for chapter 4, A Flight for Life. On the morning which had followed his interview with the Mormon prophet, John Ferrier went into Salt Lake City, and having found his acquaintance, who was bound for the Nevada mountains, he entrusted him with his message to Jefferson Hope. In it he told the young man of the imminent danger which threatened them, and how necessary it was that he should return. Having done thus, he felt easier in his mind, and returned home with a lighter heart. As he approached his farm, he was surprised to see a horse hitched to each of the posts of the gate. Still more surprised was he on entering to find 2 young men in possession of his sitting room. One, with a long pale face, was leaning back in the rocking chair, with his feet cocked up on the stove. The other, a bull-necked young youth with coarse, bloated features, was standing in front of the window, with his hand in his pocket, whistling a popular hymn. Both of them nodded to Ferrier as he entered, and the one in the rocking chair commenced a conversation. "Maybe you don't know us," he said. "This here is the son of Elder Drebber, and I'm Joseph Stangerson, who traveled with you in the desert when the Lord stretched out his hand and gathered you into the true fold." "As he will with all nations in his own good time," said the other in a nasal voice. "He grindeth slowly, but exceedingly small." John Ferrier bowed coldly. He had guessed who his visitors were. "We have come," continued Stangerson, "at the advice of our fathers, to solicit the hand of your daughter, for whichever of us may seem good to you and to her. As I have but 4 wives, and Brother Drebber here has 7, it appears to me that my claim is the stronger one." "Nay, nay, Brother Stangerson," cried the other. "The question is not how many wives we have, but how many we can keep. My father has now given over his mills to me, and I am the richer man." "But my prospects are better," said the other, warmly. "When the Lord removes my father, I shall have his tanning yard and his leather factory. Then I am your elder, and have hired the church." "It will be for the maiden to decide," rejoined young Drebber, smirking at his own reflection in the glass. "We will leave it all to her decision." During this dialogue, John Ferrier had stood fuming in the doorway, hardly able to keep his riding whip from the backs of his 2 visitors. "Look here," he said, at last, striding up to them. "When my daughter summons you, you can come. But until then, I don't want to see your faces again." The 2 young Mormons stared at him in amazement. In their eyes, this competition between them for the maiden's hand was the highest of honors, both to her and her father. "There are 2 ways out of this room," cried Ferrier. "There is the door, and there is the window. Which do you care to use?" His brown face looked so savage, and his gaunt hands so threatening, that his visitors sprang to their feet and beat a hurried retreat. The old farmer followed them to the door. "Let me know when you have settled which it is to be," he said, sardonically. "You shall smart for this," Stangerson cried, white with rage. "You have defied the prophet and the council of 4. You shall rue it to the end of your days." "The hand of the Lord shall be heavy upon you," cried young Drebber. "He will arise and smite you." "Then I'll start the smiting," exclaimed Ferrier furiously, and would have rushed upstairs for his gun had not Lucy seized him by the arm and restrained him. Before he could escape from her, the clatter of horses' hoofs told him they were beyond his reach. "The young canting rascals!" he exclaimed, wiping the perspiration from his forehead. I would sooner see you in your grave, my girl, than the wife of either of them. And so should I, father, she answered with spirit. But Jefferson will be here soon. Yes, it will not be long before he comes. The sooner the better, for we do not know what their next move may be. It is indeed high time that someone capable of giving advice and help should come to the aid of the sturdy old farmer and his adopted daughter. In the whole history of the settlement there had never been such a case of rank disobedience to the authority of elders. If minor errors were punished so sternly, what would be the fate of this arch-rebel? Ferrier knew that his wealth and position would be of no avail to him. Others, as well known as rich as himself, had been spirited away before now, and their goods given over to the church. He was a brave man, but he trembled at the vague, shadowy terrors which hung over him. Any known terror he could face with a firm lip, but the suspense was unnerving. He concealed his fears from his daughter, however, and affected to make light of the whole matter, though she, with the keen eye of love, saw plainly that he was ill at ease. He expected he would receive some message or remonstrance from Young as to his conduct, and he was not mistaken, though it came in an unlooked-for manner. Upon rising early next morning he found, to his surprise, a small square of paper pinned on to the coverlet of his bed, just over his chest. On it was printed, in bold straggling letters, 29 days are given you for amendment, and then. The dash was more fear-inspiring than any threat could have been. How this warning came into his room puzzled John Ferrier sorely, for his servants slept in an outhouse, and the doors and windows had all been secured. He crumpled the paper up and said nothing to his daughter, but the incident struck a chill into his heart. The 29 days were evidently the balance of the month which Young had promised. What strength or courage could avail against an enemy armed with such mysterious powers? The hand which fastened that pin might have struck him to the heart, and he could never have known who had slain him. Still more shaken was he next morning. They had sat down to their breakfast when Lucia, with a cry of surprise, pointed upwards. In the center of the ceiling was scrawled, with a burned stick apparently, the number 28. To his daughter it was unintelligible, and he did not enlighten her. That night he sat up with his gun and kept watch and ward. He heard nothing. He saw and heard nothing, and yet in the morning a great 27 had been painted upon the outside of his door. Thus day followed day, and as sure as morning came he found that his unseen enemies had kept their register, and had marked up in some conspicuous position how many days were left to him out of the mouth of grace. Sometimes the fatal numbers appeared upon the walls, sometimes upon the floors, and occasionally they were on small placards stuck upon the garden gate or the railings. With all his vigilance, John Ferrier could not discover whence these daily warnings proceeded. A horror which was almost superstitious came upon him at the sight of them. He became haggard and restless, and his eyes had the troubled look of some hunted creature. He had but one hope in life now, and that was for the arrival of the young hunter from Nevada. 20 had changed to 15, and 15 to 10, but there was no news of the absentee. One by one the numbers dwindled down, and still there came no sign of him. Whenever a horseman clattered down the road, or a driver shouted at his team, the old farmer hurried to his gate, thinking that help had arrived at last. At last, when he saw 5 give way to 4, and that again to 3, he lost heart, and abandoned all hope of escape. Single-handed, and with his limited knowledge of the mountains which surrounded the settlement, he knew he was powerless. The more frequented roads were strictly watched and guarded, and none could pass along them without an order from the council. Turn which way he would, there appeared to be no avoiding the blow which hung over him. Yet the old man never wavered in his resolution to part with life itself before he consented to what he regarded as his daughter's dishonor. He was sitting alone one evening pondering deeply over his troubles, and searching vainly for some way out of them. That morning had shown the figure 2 upon the wall of his house, and the next day would be the last of the allotted time. What was to happen then? All manner of vague and terrible fancies filled his imagination. And his daughter, what was to become of her after he was gone? Was there no escape from the invisible network which was drawn all around them? He sank his head upon the table, and sobbed at the thought of his own impotence. What was that? In the silence he heard a gentle scratching sound, low, but very distinct in the quiet of the night. It came from the door of the house. Ferrier crept into the hall and listened intently. There was a pause for a few moments, and then the low, insidious sound was repeated. Someone was evidently tapping very gently upon one of the panels of the door. Was it some midnight assassin who had come to carry out the murderous orders of the secret tribunal? Was it some agent who was marking up that last day of grace had arrived? John Ferrier felt that instant death would be better than the suspense which shook his nerve and chilled his heart. Springing forward, he drew the bolt and threw the door open. Outside was all calm and quiet. The night was fine, and the stars were twinkling brightly overhead. The little front garden lay before the farmer's eyes, bounded by the fence and gate. But neither there nor the road was any human being to be seen. With a sigh of relief, Ferrier looked to left and to left, right and to left, until happening to glance straight down at his own feet, he saw to his astonishment a man lying flat upon his face on the ground, with his arms and legs all asprawl. So unnerved was he at the sight that he leaned up against the wall with his hand to his throat to stifle his inclination to call out. His first thought was that the prostrate figure was that of some wounded or dying man, but as he watched it, he saw it writhe along the ground and into the hall with the rapidity and noiselessness of a serpent. Once within the house, the man sprang to his feet, closed the door, and revealed to the astonished farmer the fierce face and resolute expression of Jefferson Hope. "Good God," gasped John Ferrier, "how you scared me. Whatever made you come in like that?" "Give me food," the other man said. "I have had no time to bite or sup for 48 hours. He flung himself upon the cold meat and bread which were still lying upon the table from his host's supper, and he devoured it voraciously. "Does Lucy bear up well?" he asked, when he had satisfied his hunger. "Yes, she does not know the danger," her father answered. "That is well. The house is watched on every side. That is why I crawled my way up to it. They may be darned sharp, but they're not quite sharp enough to catch a Washoe hunter." John Ferrier felt a different man, now that he realized he had a devoted ally. He seized the young man's leathery hand and wrung it cordially. "You're a man to be proud of," he said. "There are not many who would come to share our dangers and our troubles." "You've hit it there, pard," the young hunter answered. "I have a respect for you, but if you were alone in this business, I'd think twice before I put my head into such a hornet's nest. It's Lucy that brings me here, and before harm comes on to her, I guess, there will be one less of the Hope family in Utah. What are we to do? Tomorrow is your last day, and unless you act tonight, you are lost. I have a mule and 2 horses waiting in the Eagle Ravine. How much money have you?" $2,000 in gold and 5 in notes. "That will do. I have as much more to add to it. We must push for Carson City through the mountains. You had best wake Lucy. It is as well that the servants do not sleep in the house." While Ferrier was absent, preparing his daughter for the approaching journey, Jefferson Hope packed all the eatables he could find into a small parcel, and filled a stoneware jar with water, for he knew by experience that the mountain's wells were few and far in between. He had hardly completed his arrangement before the farmer returned with his daughter, all dressed and ready for a start. The greeting between the warmers was warm, but brief, for minutes were precious, and there was much to be done. "We must make our start at once," said Jefferson Hope, speaking in his low but resolute voice, like one who realized the greatness of the peril, but has steeled his heart to meet it. "The front and back entrances are watched, but with caution we may get away through the side window and across the fields. Once on the road, we are only 2 miles from the ravine, where the horses are waiting. By daybreak we should be halfway across through the mountain." "What if we are stopped?" asked Ferrier. Hope slapped a revolver butt which protruded from the front of his tunic. "If they are too many for us, we shall take 2 or 3 of them with us," he said, with a sinister smile. The lights inside the house had all been extinguished, and from the darkened window John Ferrier peered over the fields which had been his own, and which he was about to abandon forever. He had long nerved himself to the sacrifice, however, and the thought of the honor and happiness of his daughter outweighed any regret at his ruined fortunes. All looked so peaceful and happy, the rustling trees and the broad silent stretch of grainland, that it was difficult to realize that the spirit of murder lurked through it all. Yet the white face and set expression of the young hunter showed that in his approach to the house he had seen enough to satisfy him upon that head. Ferrier carried the bag of gold and notes, and Jefferson Hope had the scant provisions and water, while Lucy had a small bundle containing a few of her more valued possessions. Opening the window very slowly and carefully, they waited until a dark cloud had somewhat obscured the night, and then, one by one, passed through into the little garden. With bated breath and crouching figure, they stumbled across it, and gained the shelter of the hedge, which they skirted until they came to the gap which opened into the cornfields. They had just reached this point when the young man seized his two companions and dragged them into the shadow, where they lay silent and trembling. It was as well that his prairie training had given Jefferson Hope the ears of a lynx. He and his friends had hardly crouched down before the melancholy hooting of a mountain owl was heard within a few yards of them, which was immediately answered by another hoot at a small distance. At the same moment a vague, shadowy figure emerged from the gap for which they had been making, and uttered the plaintive signal cry again, on which a second man appeared out of the obscurity. "Tomorrow at midnight," said the first, who appeared to be in authority. "When will the whip-poor-wills call 3 times?" "It is well," returned the other. "Shall I tell Brother Drebber?" "Pass it on to him, and from him to the others. 9 to 7. 7 to 5, repeated the other, and the two figures flitted away in different directions. Their concluding words had evidently been some form of sign and countersign. The instant that their footsteps had died away in the distance, Jefferson Hope sprang to his feet, helping his companions through the gap, led the way across the fields at the top of his speed, supporting and half carrying the girl when her strength appeared to fail her. Hurry on, he gasped from time to time. "We are through the line of sentinels. Everything depends on speed. Hurry on." Once on the high road, they made rapid progress. Only once did they meet anyone, and then they managed to slip into a field, and so avoid recognition. Before reaching the town, the hunter branched away into a rugged and narrow footpath which led to the mountains. 2 jagged peaks loomed above them through the darkness, and the defile which had led them between them was the Eagle Canyon, in which the horses were awaiting them. With unerring instinct, Jefferson Hope picked his way up among the great boulders, and along the bed of dried-up watercourse, until he came to the retired corner, screened with rocks, where the faithful animals had been picketed. The girl was placed upon the mule, and old Ferrier upon one of the horses, with his money-bag, while Jefferson Hope led the other along the precipitous and dangerous path. It was a bewildering route for anyone who was not accustomed to face nature in her wildest moods. On the one side a great crag towered up 1,000 feet or more, black, stern, and menacing, with large basaltic columns upon its rugged surface like the ribs of some petrified monster. On the other hand, a wild chaos of boulders and debris made all advance impossible. Between the two ran the irregular track, so narrow in all places that they had to travel in Indian file, and so rough that only practiced riders could have traversed it at all. Yet in spite of all the dangers and difficulties, the hearts of the fugitives were light up within them, for every step increased the distance between them and the terrible despotism from which they were flying. They soon had a proof, however, that they were still within the jurisdiction of the saints. They had reached the very wildest and most desolate portion of the pass, when the girl gave a startled cry and pointed upwards. On a rock which overlooked the track, showing out dark and plain against the sky, there stood a solitary sentinel. He saw them as they soon perceived him, and his military challenge of "Who goes there?" rang through the silent ravine. "Travelers for Nevada," said Jefferson Hope, with his hand upon the rifle which hung up by his saddle. They could see the lonely watcher fingering his gun and peering down at them as if dissatisfied with their reply. "By whose permission?" he asked. "The Holy Four," answered Ferrier. His Mormon experiences had taught him that was the highest authority to which he could refer. 9 from 7, cried the sentinel. 7 from 5, returned Jefferson Hope promptly, remembering the countersign which he had heard in the garden. "Pass, and the Lord go with you," said the voice from above. Beyond this post, the path broadened out, and the horses were able to break into a trot. Looking back, they could see the solitary watcher leaning upon his gun, and knew they had passed the outlying posts of the chosen people, and that freedom lay before them. End of chapter 4. Okay, well, we know their story's not a happy ending, right? Because Jefferson Hope ends up revenging himself upon Trevor and Stangerson. We meet the two in this chapter who the two murdered men from the first part of the book in this one. And they're both jerks because, you know, you gotta make people, the reader, feel like they deserve their fates. They argue over who will be the husband of young Lucy without her opinion at all. Even though one of them has 7 wives and one of them has 4 already. Yeah, the Mormons do not come off very great in this story. That they can just order somebody murdered and taking their wealth. This probably wouldn't be as big a deal if John Ferrier wasn't wealthy, because they are clearly after his money, right? After he is gone. And how coldly one of them says, "When the Lord removes my father, I shall have his tanning yard and his leather factory." Alright, well, it seems like there's a moment of hope. That they already passed the borders without trouble, I guess. Alright, we'll see what happens next. How many more chapters are there? 5, 6. Alright, 3 chapters more. Alright, I'll just do the final one in the next section. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. Until next time.